as an architect and designer myself, that architects and designers tend to think about, when you say digital signage, they think about a lot of signs or a lot of billboards. And architects and designers, except if they're environmental graphic designers who design wayfinding and signage, they shudder at the thought of signs and billboards and how it clutters the environment. So architects and designers have the opportunity to think in another way about this and to think about this technology as pixelated canvases rather than digital signage. And that makes a very big difference in how you approach that audience. And that audience can be a very influential audience. The issue of communication and visual clutter go hand in hand. And just because you have more signs, more menu boards, more information coming at you more quickly, doesn't mean that you're communicating any better. It doesn't mean that people are understanding. It doesn't mean that your message is getting out there, because sometimes it's just clutter and it's overwhelming. There is definitely a need for people who are trained in communicating, who understand how to put forth messages, such as environmental graphic designers who do very complex wayfinding programs or branding or create identity and experiences for a place. And all of these go hand in hand to understand when you look at one of these message boards that's just filled with so much information that it's overwhelming, and whether it's the typeface or the number of words or how quickly it changes, all of those are communication issues. And then if you expand it to a really public environment, like an urban environment, then there's the very real question of, when all of these walls on these buildings become pixelated, what is that going to say and do? And how are we going to respond to that? And how is that going to be controlled? Many cities think of this rather than as art, they think of it as advertising. So they have various rules and regulations that they follow. I can give you a specific example of a conflict regarding that. In Los Angeles, a developer built a building, and he was able to use the 1% for art. And he hired an artist to create an art form that went around the building. And to the 1% for art approved it. It was running. I think it was running for a couple weeks when someone from the streets department, or whatever department it was that regulates this, noticed it and shut it down, because he said that is a sign. That's not art. I think that it's very difficult to define and redefine what a sign is and what art is, because a lot of people see some signs as art. And that's true. Some signs are art, and some people use the digital technologies as a pixelated canvas. So that's another audience that I think needs to be addressed, and that is the audience of artists and how they're using this technology creatively. How to bring new talent into this industry is challenging, because most people and most exhibitors, for instance, if we just take this show is geared toward large companies, Walmart, Lowe's, whatever, McDonald's, who want to buy in bulk, right? Digital menus, interactive boards, whatever. And that's not what the artists or the architects are looking at. So why would they come to this show? Is a very good question. When there's a lot of interesting product here that would be very pertinent to what they do, but the product is displayed in such a way that it's not meant for that audience. And it's very hard for them to edit what's here. So for instance, this year, for the first time, we offered a curated tour of the floor, because that's one of the things that the architects and designers told me that they would like. They felt that it was just overwhelming, and that what they saw when they arrived were a lot of TV screens. And sometimes they specify that, but often they hire an integrator who will specify that. And in terms of making this an environment that's friendly for architects and designers, I think that they need to see what's happening out there that is really creative and imaginative. And it would be wonderful if when you walked in here, there was something that showed that immediately, that you just went, wow, that is spectacular. That's so creative and imaginative. I want to find out how to do that. And that, I think, is really what is needed. There are actually a lot of installations that fall into the category of wow and being really creative. For instance, last year and this year, I did webinars for DSE on what's happening around the world, interesting projects that are going on around the world. And I researched for a few months to pull them out, because there isn't any one place to find them. And much to my surprise, actually, we have so many people sign up for it. It's extraordinary how hungry people are for that information. Not just architects and designers, but the manufacturers have no idea of what's going on out there. Because in some other countries, the use of pixels as a media is much farther advanced than it is here. For instance, in Europe, it is, and particularly among Dutch and German architects. So if people want to know more about this, they can go to the website. The webinars are still up, and you can zip through them and see what's going on around the world. It's really very exciting. One of my most favorite installations, I can name so many, but I think the most spectacular one these days is the new installation at the Bradley International Terminal at LAX. And that is a true example of what happens when you get the right team recognizing that you are working together to create an environment, a complete environment, an experience, in this case for the passenger, not just a signboard. And so the other component of that is the content. The content is so critical, because when you put this up and the entire environment is made up of digital canvases, then who manages it? Who refreshes it? You can't just have a big black canvas sitting up there. So it's another way of thinking. When you think that the walls aren't brick and mortar, the walls aren't drywall, The walls are pixelated screens. Content is actually a very, very challenging subject. And it's a challenge to everyone. Whether you use existing content that you stream, whether the content becomes interactive, or whether you hire a company like Arsenal or Moment Factory to create content particularly for this environment. There are a lot of issues. For instance, in the LAX, there are the issues of the architecture and the light streaming in. How is that going to affect it? Because in that particular situation, the architecture was done prior to the development of this concept of this total immersive experience in the arrival and waiting areas. There are a lot of things that you just don't think about when you are thinking about content. I mean, you just think, oh, I'll just develop some story. But that's not the case. For instance, at LAX, there's the whole issue of time. How much time are they going to spend watching it? How much time before it's repeated? There's the whole, it's so different from sitting in a theater and watching a movie. And also, people are seeing this from different heights, from different perspectives. So designing the content for the audience, for the specific environment, for the experience that you want to create, all of this is very, very challenging. And the manufacturers who manufacture screens should not sell themselves as content designers. I think another example that is a fabulous example is the luminous pathway in Montreal. And the reason, aside from how beautiful it is, it's very important because it brings together the creativity of artists, economic development, and rejuvenation of a neighborhood. And it's hard to do all that. People are often talking about how can we get the artists more involved. Of course, they talk all the time about this neighborhood's run down, how can we rejuvenate it? These programs are very expensive. There's no question about that. What do we do? How will this reinforce or nurture economic development? And in the case of the luminous pathway, it's such a success, and it's only been 10 years. And it does all of that. And it doesn't clutter the environment. And it's not a visual cacophony of images. One question that comes up for people who are really interested in this subject area is education. How are the future designers being educated about this technology and how to use it beyond a sign or billboard? The answer is they're not. And I think, this is just my opinion, but I think part of the reason is that the faculty in the architecture and the design schools, interior design, industrial design, that they're not familiar with this. They're not familiar with this technology. They're not familiar with using it as a canvas. And so they're not prepared to teach it, and they certainly can't talk about it. And I think that if I were to give any message out there to any of these manufacturers, I would say go fund a design studio at one of the universities and have it focus on utilizing these technologies really creatively, because it's those young people who are going to graduate in a year or two who are going to come into the firms, the design firms, advertising agencies, architecture firms, whatever, and they're the ones who are going to understand and appreciate how to use this.